Hostage is truly one of the game modes of all time, sitting at the very end of the competitive queue to only be played by people who either misclicked or really like waiting for smokes to disappear. But as you might know, this wasn't always the case. Hostage used to be not only the most popular, but actually the only game mode in the first couple Counter-Strike releases. So this got me wondering, how did it get here and what caused it to lose its popularity so hard? In this video we'll analyze the apparent design flaws of the Hostage game mode itself, as well as the official maps made for it. We'll also look at community maps from past operations that tried their best to make it work, and even interview some of the creators behind them. Hopefully by the end of this video we will have a better understanding of what works and what doesn't, what is Valve's fault and what is on the map makers, and basically what should we expect from a CS2 Hostage map going forward. But first of all, we need to understand where it all began. Back, way back.
Okay, let's go.
Everything considered, the first proper iteration of the Hostage game mode in CS 1.6 was quite similar to what we have today, except for the fact that the hostages actually walk to follow the cities and can also be killed. Even for the low standards we had back then, this was a complete mess, with hostages constantly dying and failing to follow basic instructions. The game mode was definitely very T-sided and the maps for it did little to help. Office, Assault, Mansion, Militia and Italy, just to name a few, all share a, let's call it a fortress design. By that I mean they have all of the hostages in a single spot that has few, uncomfortable and choky entrances that are easy to camp. Today this sounds quite bad, but I think at the time it was actually a surprisingly good design. Cause these maps were easy for newer players to understand, like, look at this building, there's hostages inside, go get them. Much simpler than, listen, there's two random courtyards with abstract crates that look like all of the other crates around the map, but no, these are special. And terrorists, they can come to either one, and one of them might bring a bomb, and if it's planted then you need to come and defuse, but if it's not planted then you just wait around it and make sure they don't pick it up. Especially considering how these maps were featured in the first ever Counter-Strike, all players were new players, and I think they appreciated learning the basics of movement, gunplay and economy on these simpler maps where they didn't have to worry about multiple bomb sites or complicated rotations. That said, today isn't 20 years ago. Nowadays, even though you can still find a decent amount of people that enjoy camping either side of a smoked hallway, seemingly most have moved on from fortress-type maps. And that wasn't for a lack of trying. Throughout the years, these maps and the game mode received numerous updates that made it more balanced. First of all, with CSGO, hostages became invulnerable and pick-upable as they are today, which made going for the objective as city actually make sense. And secondly, on pretty much all of the maps, hostages got separated into two different spots, so they are harder to camp. As well, many, like Assault and Italy, got additional entrances and rotation paths to make them less choky. Hell, Mansion got so many changes it wasn't the same map anymore, so they renamed it to Estate. But even with all of those improvements, that wasn't enough to keep the OG Hostage maps alive. Funnily enough, Office, the one that had basically no changes from its 1.6 version, the chokiest map of them all, remained as the most popular one by far. But what if I told you that there was a map that utilized all of the aforementioned advantages of a fortress design while eliminating the whole choke point problem entirely? Perhaps even a map that has no choke points, like, at all. Well, let me tell you about... Originally featured in CSGO in 2014 and 17, as well as its sequel in 2022, Insertions remain to this day as some of, if not the most iconic operation maps, consistently topping all sorts of tier lists and having whole essays made about them. Most people say they enjoyed the unique gameplay and like that it doesn't feel like regular Counter-Strike. Swedish people apparently just liked it because it's in Sweden, but I think even at its core, the level design present is very strong and often overlooked. The layout takes the classic hostage fortress, but moves it out of the corner into the center of the map, adding more flank opportunities and making it much harder to camp. Not only that, but the city spawns as well, instead of being in the opposite corner, are now spread out over 4 spawn points that they can individually choose at the start of the round in this hangar. These are also given a garage where they pick between 2 spawns, though they're quite similar location-wise and I think are more so there to keep them entertained while cities are making the hard decisions. Moreover, unlike usual CS maps that have a fine balance between playable and negative space, Insertion and Insertion 2 are pretty much fully open, which really flips the balance on its head. Now, instead of being scared to push in as a city, terrorists are the ones that are horrified of peeking out into a forest full of enemies. And stuff like smokes that usually help them are nearly useless now, since there's no choke points to block, yet still retain a bit of utility for cities, for repositioning or picking up the hostage. All of these factors go above and beyond in helping bring the balance back in favor of the attacking cities. If you had the chance to queue Insertion 2 and especially Insertion 1, you know how challenging and frankly nerve-wracking it was to be a T on that map. For the first half of the round. Something that I myself haven't thought much about, but made a ton of sense after talking with Rick, one of the creators of Agency, is that hostage maps are unique in the way that every lane present on them needs to be fun and balanced in both directions. Like, for example, if you think about the design of mid on Mirage, gameplay sort of goes this way. All of the cover and angles are designed around T's pushing in and cities trying to prevent them from doing so. If cities were the ones to try and push up mid, everything becomes kinda weird and awkward really quickly. And yeah, rounds like this do happen sometimes, but this area is clearly more designed for setup rather than combat, which makes sense. On diffuse maps, T-spawn just isn't supposed to be used much after round start anyway. But on hostage maps, cities firstly attack T-spawn, and if they succeed they also need to attack city spawn against the remaining Ts, which in fact makes designing lanes for hostage require much more thought about both directions. And I think this area is where a lot of the OG maps failed. On Insertion 1, once cities get the hostage, they lose a lot of their advantage. Since Ts know which hostage they took and where they are, they know that there's only one hostage rescue zone, and all of these trees and bushes that initially helped cities are now also being used by terrorists to camp them. In my opinion, this dynamic wasn't the best, though thankfully Insertion 2 has put a lot of effort into addressing this issue. Being set in a much more urban environment, it replaced many of its bushy and foresty areas with proper buildings and infrastructure. They still had many angles and positions to use that retained the freedom they gave to the attackers, but with better defined outlines that improved visibility and made meaningful counterplay possible. Now bringing the hostage into the rescue zone, I can roughly imagine where the enemy is likely to be. As well, I myself can use all sorts of routes to try and outplay them, even in the weirdest of situations. In general, giving players the ability to counterplay anything is something Insertion 2 truly excels at. Like, playing it for the first time I thought that this position on the T roof was overpowered, but soon I learned that if I pick this spawn as a city, I will catch the guy going there with his pants down and get myself a free kill. Though after he realizes what's going on, he will start to camp me, so I'll go down the subway here to get an angle on him he won't expect, and yada yada. Basically, there were overpowered positions, but every overpowered position had positions that were overpowered against it, which allowed you to excel not only by learning the map, but also by learning your enemies over the course of the game, achieving this sort of meta balance, where at the start it isn't necessarily fair, but with every passing round it progressively gets there, making the last couple of minutes of an Insertion game a masterful tactical culmination of everything that has come prior. Unless everyone rage quits, cause apparently many people didn't like the fog. So with everything that I just told you, do I think that Insertion 2 is the best hostage map ever? Maybe. Definitely one of the best looking, but there are still some problems with the game mode it didn't really address. One of the bigger ones is random hostage spawns. Remember how I told you that in CSGO hostages got split into 2 separate spots? Well, that is true, but the spots are randomized as well. For example, on Office, the long side hostage can sometimes spawn in this hallway and sometimes inside here. And clearly one of these spawns is so much more T-sided. Same goes for Insertion 2. On it, the hostages don't just spawn in different rooms, but in entirely different buildings. Not only did that make certain parts of the map pretty much irrelevant depending on the hostage setup, a hostage spawning in the supermarket from my experience was so T-sided in comparison to all other possible scenarios. And since all these spawns are chosen randomly at the start of the game and don't change until it's over, it's just a very weird feature in my opinion. Why was this feature even implemented in the first place? Well, I'm not sure. Probably just to increase variety. It kinda reminds me of Payday and Left 4 Dead 2, where certain aspects of a mission were randomized each run to increase replayability. Especially considering how early CSGO was developed by the Left 4 Dead guys, maybe they thought this would work the same way for CS. Though this was certainly an idea even before that. I found this 2007 Game Banana tutorial for CS2's that said, hostages spawning in different locations each round will make the players really need to teamwork. I also looked for discussions on this topic, and outside of people just being used to how it is right now, I saw some mention that since players spawn randomly in their spawn, then it makes sense for hostages to do that as well. Meanwhile, arguments against random spawns are quite easy to come up with. For example, you wouldn't have the bomb sites on diffuse maps randomly moved to different spots for the sake of variety. I mean, it probably doesn't matter too much, since hostages stay in the same spot after team switch. It doesn't make the game less balanced per se, though definitely makes the maps less consistent. And if you ask me, an inconsistent map is hard to take seriously. And this was Insertion's other big problem. Even though it was very well designed and quite impressively balanced, it was so out of the realm of regular Counter-Strike gameplay, it was hard for people to take it seriously. In minds of many, it was a fun map to hang out on that no one would really try hard on. Which isn't necessarily bad, but if we consider that Counter-Strike is most well known for its serious esport competitive scene, it makes sense that a less serious game mode would fall out of favor. But there definitely were maps that tried to make the hostage a bit more competitive by reducing the impact of the silly elements like random spawns, and even borrowing some of the diffusal's design language. Let's talk about... I don't want to go into the sun if I can avoid it. That's right, yeah. Apollo was featured in 2021's Operation Broken Fang, and even though this was its only official appearance in game, it definitely left an impact on me. I from the beginning was quite biased, since I love space and NASA is my favorite tax-wasting company, so a map set in the Kennedy Space Center was quite a treat. I remember some years ago, as a part of my meteorological after-school activity, we went to a conference and actually met Bob Cabana there, who is the director of the Kennedy Space Center. He gave me a pencil and a NASA sticker. What a cool guy. I proceeded to stick it on my trusty HP laptop, but sadly it was later taken away from me by my abusive stepdad. Anyway, gameplay. Apollo's main feature is splitting the two hostages as far as possible, thus achieving a sort of diffusal-inspired layout with dedicated A and B sites. This has a number of knock-on effects on how this map plays. Here Ts can't just throw 5 smokes down the hallway and win. They would be split up across the map and wouldn't usually have more than 2 for any single entrance. So their use now is more akin to DE maps, where smokes are more so thrown to delay pushes before rotations arrive. And these rotating Ts would have a hard decision on their hands. They could try and go help their team in the hostage room, but it takes quite a bit of time to get there, and arriving late would mean that the cities are already well on their way out. Alternatively, Ts could decide to give up on the hostage room and push into city spawn instead, to try and hold them off from getting to the rescue zone. These factors make cities on Apollo much more likely to succeed in picking up the hostage, moving more of the action towards the second half of the round, which I think is very good for the health of the game mode. To understand why, let's look at the core dynamics of Diffuse and compare them to hostage. So, first of all, defending is easier than attacking in Counter-Strike in uttermost cases. Even with proper executes and picker's advantage, just the fact that the defenders know where attackers are gonna be coming from gives them an inherent upper hand. That's why in Diffuse, Ts can get stronger guns for a cheaper price, larger, cheaper Molotovs, and even some extra money for planting the bomb. All of that just to combat the natural defender's advantage, and they even get to enjoy a bit of it while defending the bomb. But nonetheless, most maps in game are still slightly CT-sided, that's how strong it is. While in Hostage you put Ts in the defender's role, still with their stronger guns, grenades and economy. And even if City somehow managed to take the hostage, T's still retain a good bit of the advantage, since they defend once again in the rescue zone. So just by the core dynamics of the game mode, cities are completely shafted by default. And we haven't even mentioned how they would be also moving slower and louder because of the sleepy guy on their shoulder. The only reparation they get is the small money bonus for picking up and rescuing the hostage. So as I see it, there is a problem here, that we can either solve by making T's the ones to rescue the hostage, however we would explain that in lore, or maybe we can just adjust the city economy specifically for the hostage game mode, or in case of Apollo, try and increase the hostage pickup rate to really make the most of that money bonus. I think this was one of the big contributing factors that made it feel so balanced, as well as how all lanes and areas were designed to be played in both directions, and how well made was the rescue zone, being nearly impossible to lock down as a T without proper communication. Yeah, I really enjoyed playing this map and felt like it had some competitive potential. But did the rest of the community feel that way? Well, after talking with Vaya, one of the creators of Apollo, I learned that it wasn't quite as popular as you would expect from a map featured in one of the biggest games of all time, apparently seeing less than 2,000 concurrent players by the end of the operation, in comparison to over 500,000 on Dust 2. We both suspect that one of the reasons for that is that silly casual, uncompetitive stigma that follows hostage maps. And if on Insertion it was kinda understandable, here it's just a bit of a shame to see such, in my opinion, competitive map be dismissed just cause it's hostage. Vaya even shared with me how a woman he was seeing at the time told him,
"Congrats on getting into the game! Shame it's a hostage map though."
Oh my god, bro.
That's crazy. Nonetheless, Vaya is up and working on a remake of Apollo for CS2. I've been showing mostly footage from CSGO for it since the CS2 version isn't fully finished yet, but it will soon be there, so if you have any feedback or ideas, make sure to share them with him. He truly cares a lot and listens to all feedback. Back in the day, I myself appeared 3 times in the patch notes for it, and even found him answering comments under random gameplay videos of his map. So he'll for sure read everything here and of course on Apollo's workshop page. Link in the description. But alright, 2 great maps in, and even though we learned a lot, we are still running into the people's prejudice against hostage game mode. Well, I can think of one more hostage rescue map. One that was more popular than pretty much anything else community made outside of Cache. Basically, the most successful custom hostage map in Counter-Strike history. And its name is... Where do I even begin with this one? Well, let's start with the fact that this map holds the record for the most operations included, being featured in 4 total and even eventually getting included into the game permanently, kinda like Cache. Looking through comments and forums, it's clear that Agency was very beloved, not only by the CS devs, but also by the player base. So what's the secret for its success? Well, I at first wasn't quite sure myself. I of course played this map a bunch while it was in game and enjoyed it thoroughly, but it seemingly didn't have a unique feature per se. It doesn't really offer any of the crazy open-endedness of Insertion or the diffuse inspiration of Apollo. So what makes it work? Well, I went directly to the source and talked with Rick. I mentioned him previously, he is one of the mappers behind Agency, and we had a great conversation. It lasted over an hour, so I couldn't include it here, but I will link it in full at the end of this video. We covered many topics, but to summarize, I learned that most of Agency's success lied in it just being very polished and well designed, especially compared to other maps at the time. Like, if you think about it, back then, when Operation Bravo was coming out, most maps were either remakes of classics or new ones but with often quite questionable designs. To see a level like Agency that had every single position, angle and path iterated to perfection, with clean modern visuals, especially in contrast with the dusty grit of early CSGO, yeah, it's no wonder this map was liked. The fact that during first couple of years of CSGO even existing, Buddy, its other creator, already considered stuff like clear visibility and the hostage mode's 2 directions of play is very impressive. I myself at the time was running around with a knife on Silver 3, never thinking about level design deeper than my custom Minecraft horror maps. But Agency was right there, ahead of its time. In my mind it was like Office, but basically better in every way. And maybe that was its main strength. It didn't try to redesign the game mode or play with people's expectations, and just gave players exactly what they wanted, but polished to the max. Though similarly to what happened with OG maps, everything I just glazed about Agency was back then. Today pretty much every community map is that polished, and Agency had to step up its game. And recently it did with its new CS2 version, not only updating the visuals, but also making many adjustments to the gameplay, in hopes to modernize it and address some of the inherent T-sidedness we have spent the whole video talking about. But to do it justice, I think I'll cover this remake separately in a future video once I play a few more games on it, alright? So where does that leave us? Hostage mode has some core issues that should probably get addressed by Valve, like the poor city economy and the inherent terrorist defender's advantage. But there's also stuff like the random hostage spawns, which I think are interesting as they put us at a crossroads of sorts. Clearly, how it is right now is just weird and annoying. I don't know anyone who avidly supports the current spawn mechanic. But I was surprised to learn that many people, including Rick and Vaya, think that having the hostages use different spawns every single round would make more sense and potentially be more fun. I'm personally more on the side of the consistent spawn points that don't change. I understand the argument for random every round, but I'm afraid it will distance the hostage mode even farther away from comp, which maybe isn't bad, but historically made it less popular. What do you think? Make sure to tell me in the comments. Knowing Valve, if they decide to do something about it, they'll probably come up with a third option that no one even considered, because that's just how they do things. But back to the topic. As we have seen, maps also have a great effect on how the mode is played and perceived. And out of the 3 community ones we discussed, it's not like any one of them is better than the other. They are just different and take on different approaches to make it work. Rick and Vaya both said that there is no one correct way to design a hostage map, and I must agree. It's even kinda beautiful in a way that Hostage allows for such a variety of designs that all work in their own merit, while DE maps often feel like different flavors of the same idea. So if I am to ever make a hostage map myself, I'll take all of these lessons to heart. Maybe I'll make an Insertion type map set on an Arctic base, maybe I'll steal the idea of that one contest map with the huge elevator, or maybe I'll make something new entirely. Like one of my older CSGO maps that was like regular hostage, but the rescue zone was in T-spawn, cause that was fun. Though that's only if I manage to get the mapping tools running. My RTX 2060 really is worst enemies with Source 2. But of course, it's not just me. There are still new maps being made. New hostage maps by new mappers with their new attempts to balance the game mode. Alpine, for example, was one of my favorite experiences in recent memory, and it was hostage and made it work. Can't wait to cover it again closer to the Mapcore contest deadline. And the Italy remake and its relatively recent inclusion in competitive show that Valve still cares about hostage mode, at least just a tiny bit. So let's hope we'll see more love put into it going forward. Here's the summary of this video in bullet points. I hope it was entertaining, educational, and maybe even a bit inspirational. Huge thanks to Vaya and Rick, who really helped me out with this video a lot and basically inspired me to make it. I initially wanted to just cover the topic of random hostage spawns, but clearly there's so much more to cover. They both were really interesting to see. What do you guys think about the remake of Apollo and Agency? So if you have any opinions and feedback, make sure to tell them, they would really appreciate it. And as well, also thanks to Osmost for making Insertion, even though I didn't interview him. But yeah, I just really like these maps. Here's the link to the Rick interview. You might find it interesting. And also all of the links to the map featured and my Discord and everything is in the description. As usual, thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, smash that like button and make sure to subscribe. I'll hopefully see you next week, but for now, bye bye.